Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever wondered how a completely ordinary dispute over a monthly household bill could spiral all the way to the highest court in the land and end up fundamentally rewriting how government power is understood? Well, that's exactly what we're looking at today. We're going to explore how a single household's property tax dispute in Cape Town escalated into a massive, landmark constitutional court ruling about power, transition, and taxation in post-apartheid South Africa. Let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll kick things off with a localized financial shock, unpack the immense challenge of unifying a divided city, and then examine the legal loophole that caused an absolute crisis. From there, we'll dive into the constitutional power to tax and wrap up with the final verdict.
All right, Section 1, the Million Rand Tax Shock, a Camps Bay property tale.
We begin our story in the affluent seaside suburb of Camps Bay with an elderly couple, the Robertsons. Back in 1969, they bought a vacant lot for a grand total of just 7,250 Rand. Now, as Camps Bay became highly desirable, their property value naturally soared. In 1979, the property was valued at just over 52,000 Rand. But wait for it, by the year 2000, under a new city valuation, that value leaped to a staggering 1.7 million Rand. I mean, talk about absolute sticker shock.
And the immediate financial impact of that new valuation was severe. Before July 2002, the Robertsons were paying about 683 Rand a month, but overnight, their tax bill doubled to over 1,360 Rand. That is a massive 113% increase. Arguing this was completely exorbitant relative to their fixed budget, they decided they weren't just going to pay it. They took the city of Cape Town straight to court.
Moving on to Section 2, unifying a divided city, the integration challenge.
To truly wrap our heads around why this massive reevaluation happened in the first place, we have to zoom way out from the Robertsons' personal grievance. South Africa was going through a protracted, highly difficult transition to integrate formerly segregated local authorities. This huge undertaking started in early 1994, progressed through an interim phase in 1996, and finally culminated in December 2000. In Cape Town specifically, this meant taking 60 separate racially divided local authorities and somehow merging them into a single unicity. Under the old system, Cape Town had this chaotic patchwork of tax rolls. Some were literally 20 years out of date. And worse, due to historical segregation, black residential areas had never even been valued for property rates at all. So the new goal for the unicity was to completely overhaul this. They needed to establish a single, unified system using modern appraisal techniques to form one equitable tax base.
Because think about it, without aggressive restructuring, the profound historical neglect of certain areas would just be permanently entrenched. The city had to overcome those outdated rules, stop applying unfair across-the-board rate increases, and actually value previously excluded black residential areas. Everyone across the entire city simply had to be measured by the exact same yardstick.
Okay, Section 3, the legal loophole, the Robertsons strike back.
So, as the Unicity rolled out these new rates, the Robertsons didn't just complain, they and their lawyers went digging. They sifted through the transitional legislation and found what looked to be fatal legal flaws. They argued there was a casus omissus. That's a fancy Latin term for an omitted case, or basically, a giant legal loophole. They claimed a vital missing link existed between the old apartheid-era statutes and the new city's authority to actually use them.
They broke their argument down into three very specific steps. First, they said the 1993 Property Valuation Ordinance, or PVO, had actually lapsed and wasn't valid anymore. Second, they pointed out that the newly formed unicity didn't even fit the old legal definition of a local authority. And third, they argued that the city was using a quote-unquote provisional valuation role, which they claimed couldn't legally be used to demand actual money from citizens. They were effectively arguing the city was operating on dead laws. Which raises a pretty wild question. A real David versus Goliath moment here. Did the bureaucratic Goliath actually forget to secure its own legal right to tax? Is it possible the city of Cape Town completely failed to legally empower itself during this massive transition? Amazingly, the High Court initially sided with the citizens. No way, right? They completely agreed with the Robertsons that there was a legislative gap. The High Court literally froze the city's ability to levy these new rates. And as you can imagine, this created an absolute fiscal disaster. A city simply cannot function without its tax base. And suddenly, Cape Town's revenue collection was entirely legally paralyzed.
This brings us to Section 4, the power to tax, original constitutional powers.
Facing total financial ruin, the city immediately appealed to the Constitutional Court. And this is where the entire conversation shifts. We're talking about a massive conceptual shift in government power. Under the old order of parliamentary sovereignty, municipalities were treated as mere creatures of statute. They were morbid entities. They could only do exactly what Parliament explicitly permitted them to do. But under the new 1996 Constitution, we have constitutional supremacy. Cities are now recognized as an independent sphere of government with original powers.
Constitutional Court Justice, Judge Moseneke, brilliantly illustrated this new reality. He essentially stated that local government is no longer just sitting around waiting for a higher authority to breathe life into it. Because municipalities have constitutionally entrenched powers, their actions aren't automatically invalid just because some specific, older piece of legislation doesn't explicitly authorize it. It's a whole new ballgame. The Constitutional Court mapped out exactly where the city's power came from. It turned out the power to tax didn't rely on some dusty old pre-1994 ordinance at all. Instead, it flowed directly from Chapter 7 and Section 229 of the Constitution itself, giving municipalities the express power to impose property rates. And all of this was backed up by very robust transitional acts.
Finally, Section 5, the final verdict, a landmark reversal.
So how did the Constitutional Court resolve this massive conflict? Well, they systematically dismantled the High Court's ruling. Where the lower court found a legislative gap and treated the city as a subordinate creature of statute, the Constitutional Court found absolutely no gap whatsoever. They validated the tax and formally recognized the city's constitutional autonomy, declaring that the new city legally succeeded to all the powers of the old, fragmented municipalities. Furthermore, the court directly addressed the Robertsons' complaint about that provisional valuation role. The court ruled that using a provisional role was highly practical and totally legal. Think about it. If the city had to sit on its hands and wait for every single objection and appeal to be finalized before collecting taxes, it would entirely frustrate the fiscal object. Simply put, stopping tax collection while waiting for endless legal appeals would literally bankrupt the city.
And here is a surprising twist to end the legal battle. Zero. The Constitutional Court ordered exactly $0 in costs against the Robertsons. Even though they lost the appeal, the court acknowledged they were acting in good faith. They were legitimately trying to vindicate a constitutional right regarding how they were being taxed. They weren't acting with ulterior motives, so they were not financially punished for bringing the case forward.
Which leaves us with this final thought. You know, this case wasn't just about a 1 million rand property valuation. It was a deeply impartial look at the true price of building a unified society. It forces us to ask, how do we actually balance an individual's sudden, very heavy tax burden with the city's fundamental, constitutional imperative to fund a fair and integrated community? It's a tough question of transition and equity that goes far, far beyond a single property in Camps Bay. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.